every time the new year comes around, I believe to my core that January is going to be the beginning of how I became a millionaire. 1 week into it, and I'm already f***ing it up. But not with reading. I may not be a millionaire yet, but as you can see from the title of this video, I'm starting 2025 as a bookworm. Now maybe you're wondering, how did I manage to read all these books in 30 days? 31 actually. It is very simple and extremely attainable, and my secret is not having a life at all, and that is basically how I managed to achieve most of the things I've achieved in my life. I tapped into a variety of genres this January. I finished an entire book series. I got some questionable dark romance in my system, and I didn't forget the classics. First of all, let's start with the biggest disappointment of this month, which is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I've heard so much about this book for the past years on BookTube and on Book Talk, and I had such high hopes for it. Also, it is one of Haley Pham's favorite books, and I wanted to give it a try, and it didn't meet my expectations at all. You probably know what this is about, but if you don't, it's a YA fantasy book about Jude, a human that lives in the world of fays and finds herself deep into their politics and also within a war for the succession of the throne. I'm gonna say that the writing style was exquisite, keeping in mind that I wanted to DNF it, and I would have DNF'd it if it wasn't for the writing style that made it quite easy to go through it. And that I really appreciate. What made me sad about this book is that I didn't feel engulfed in this whimsical fae world. I don't really have any other experience with fae universe. Well, except I do. I once mistaken a very smutty fairy book for an ACOTAR book, and I was extremely surprised. But that's another story. But I don't really have real books about faes that I've read before. So maybe it is a me problem, but I just didn't feel close to this universe. And when I'm reading a fantasy book, I usually want to be in that story. The way the fays and their powers and their world was depicted in The Cruel Prince was even boring a little bit. It was just not appealing to me. A contemporary fantasy world with fays and also Apple stores isn't really my thing. I haven't read a contemporary fantasy before either, but from what I see, I don't really like it. It just takes me out of the story. I'm planning on reading the Crescent Moon series, where there is also contemporary fantasy. We'll see if it was this book or the entire trope. It was very politically heavy, which I'm reading the book of Azrael right now, and it is also very politically heavy, and that didn't bother me. But in this book, the stakes didn't even feel high enough, even though they were high. I just didn't really care about what's happening. Again, the writing style made it somehow fast-paced, even though it was boring, so that is a big strength for this book. And I was so disappointed with the romance. I thought this was going to have quite some romance in it. I didn't want anything outrageous, but Carlton was just a whiny little bitch, to be honest. I will, however, go more in depth with this book and show you some quotes and more about how it made me feel in a future video in which I will read more of Haley Pham's favorite book. The Serpent and the Wings of Night is another book I read, romantasy again, but I'm gonna start by saying that its name is a complete killjoy for me. It took me so much time to be able to pronounce it without mumbling the name. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. The book is about Araya, a human who picked the attention of the vampire king Vincent, who adopted her and raised her as his daughter. Also, he trained her a lot so as to be able to survive in a world where there are vampires everywhere. So she lived among vampires, and she trained to be able to compete in this deadly competition, which if she wins, she is granted a wish by the vampire goddess called Nyxia. I've dabbled in vampire content as a young teenager who wanted to escape the struggles of math problems and started way too young with True Blood, and then started the Vampire Diaries, which is very dear to me. But I liked it so much that any other vampire story didn't cut it for me. But somehow Miss Carissa made me fall in love with this book. To be honest, the first few chapters didn't really made it for me. I wasn't really invested in her relationship with her father, neither did I care about the main male interest. But at some point, somehow I got hooked and I started getting so interested in what's going to happen that it became one of my favorite books. Don't really know how that happened. What's funny is that I didn't really like Rain in the beginning, the MMC, because I kept imagining him as this weird cartoonish dude. So I didn't manage to read properly and thought that he smelled like stale dessert or pie went bad, and that didn't really add to how I was imagining him. But at some point, the weird cartoonish image faded away and I could appreciate the love story. Forced to fight each other even though they cared for one another, and that was conflicting even for me. And also, he is rather the sunshine and she's the grumpy one. I kind of like that dynamic as well. I will admit that there is just something about the love interest being binded to one another somehow magically so that they can feel each other's emotions that I just like so much. So that is one of, maybe it's a trope that I like so much. I kind of read for the vibes and I don't even realize there are plot holes, to be honest. That's what happens with the endings because I don't really realize what's going to happen because I focus on the present. And the ending of this book completely took me by surprise. I didn't expect it. Sort of didn't like it somehow, but at the same time, it was very interesting and it made me really want to know how the story is going to unfold in the next book, which I'm about to read. But I want to buy the physical copy of. I don't know if I'm gonna read it on my phone again because I just can't wait for it. I'm not a very critical reader. If it makes me want to be part of that world and it is a page turner, it kind of gets a 5-star rating. So this book is a 5-star for me. Lilac is still a very good series and it was my first romantasy and I loved it, but the Empyrean series is in a different league. I read all 3 of them as ebooks because I couldn't wait for the order to arrive. I got them in physical format, all of them, because I just like them so much. Only Iron Flame is here, so I'm just gonna showcase this one in this video. Once I realized that everyone was obsessed with the release of Onyx Storm on the 21st of January, I decided I'm gonna binge read the first 2 books, which I did, and I absolutely loved them. Fourth Wing follows Violet Sorrengail, who is forced by her mother, who's also the general of the war college she's going to attend, to become a dragon rider in a world where death is at every step. She has to compete with way stronger candidates while being targeted for what her mom did in the past. Amongst the ones wanting her dead is also Xaden Ryerson, who is this very hot, very powerful wing leader in this war college. That's mainly what the first book is about. I basically canceled all my plans to be able to read these books, and I physically felt like I was in Basgiath about to get my first dragon. So if a book does that to me, it's going to get 5 or 7 stars or even more stars. So my favorite series at the moment. I adored most of the tropes that were present in these books: the dystopian background, the dark and mysterious MMC, magic, dragons, political intrigue. It leans heavily on the romantic side, but the political aspect is still there, if not the same as the romantic part. So I think this is the perfect mixture for a very intriguing romantasy. And Violet and Xaden's story is just something else. Don't get me wrong, there are things I didn't like in these books. There were a lot of cringy aspects here and there, and I think that happens with a lot of books, and I am delusional enough to just ignore all that. I don't like the chapter, it never happened. That's what I do when I like a book, but I don't like a a certain thing that happens in the book. I get bored quite easily and I need the plot to keep me engaged. I don't want to know how the ending is going to be from the first chapters. And with this series, that was not an issue. I had no idea what was going to happen with the main characters. And I was quite depressed when I finished Onyx Storm. I feel like that world is very close to what I would like the world to be if there was magic. So, characters could have been a tad bit more complex, and some spicy scenes were a bit cringe. The writing may be a bit too simplistic, but the positive aspects greatly outweighed the not so likable parts of the book. If you've already read the first 2 books of the series, maybe you want to see my reading vlog of Onyx Storm. I go much more in depth with what's going on in the book there. You can find the link in my description box and also here, I think. The next 2 books I read this month were contemporary romances, which kind of surprised me, to be honest. And the first one is The Love Hypothesis. This was the most heartwarming rom-com I have ever read. Olive, a PhD student, ends up fake dating one of her grumpy but very good-looking professors to convince her best friend that she is over her ex. And they end up falling in love. I can't tell you how many times I giggled and laughed and kicked my feet in the air with this book. It was just such a good read, to be honest. And I liked it so much that I'm even getting the urge to read it again, even though I just finished it. So if that isn't an indicator of a good book, I don't know what is. It is an extremely laid-back and easy read, and with every interaction Adam and Olive had, I fell in love more and more with their love story. Ellie Hazelwood managed to make me forget about my life and enter this academia love story I didn't even think I would like. I cannot recommend it enough if you want a funny, relaxing rom-com to read. If you're wondering about spice, I don't think that the spicy part is the main interest of the book. But, that being said, there are 2 chapters that are entirely spice, and I would say quite an intense flavor of spice. Nothing too outrageous, but it is there in your face. Now, if you don't like spice at all, maybe you won't like this book, but if you don't mind it, then I would recommend it to you. The Love Hypothesis reminded me how engaging and relaxing a book can be, and that I should throw my phone out the window and pick up a book instead. You know what? 7 stars, to be honest. I understand why people might not enjoy it that much. It is not outstanding. It is not anything philosophical or something that would just alter your brain. It is just a very, very sweet book. The next one is Icebreaker, which I had to eventually read, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Still don't think it is a good book, let's say, but it was an easy read. I kind of enjoyed reading it. If you don't know, it is a sports romance between a hockey player and a figure skater that end up having to share ice time, and eventually they need to work together to help Stacy, the figure skater, train for an upcoming competition. And they end up falling in love. I absolutely loved the training part of the book. I would have liked much more about how they trained together and how they bonded, rather than the spicy scenes. There was a lot of sex in this book that was sort of unnecessary. Also, the main conflict is very childish. Didn't really like that. But as a whole, the book surprised me because my standards were so very low. It was a very simple and easy book that I somehow enjoyed. I wouldn't say it is the best romance book out there, not even close to it, but I would give it a 2-star rating. Still, I wouldn't recommend it. Anyway, if you want to hear more about the romance books I've read lately, I have a video just on viral TikTok romance books I've read, in which I go much more in depth. You can check that out if you want. Does It Hurt is the next book I read this month, which, well, the title refers to if it hurts her when he... Yeah, that's that. It was a a dark romance book, quite dark, with a very interesting thriller subplot. It's about Sawyer, a fugitive who flees the country and has a one-night stand with a mysterious guy who has severe mommy issues. She steals his identity and unexpectedly they ended up stranded on an island together. A very weird island, that is. There is a lot of trauma bonding and hate sex and other weird stuff going on in this book, so if you don't like that, this is not a book for you. It is not a book for a lot of people. I like to go for dark romances from time to time, but if this book is not for you, I understand. I don't think it really should be for anyone, but somehow I liked it, I think. With dark romance, you need to be able to skip entire chapters, paragraphs, or character traits to be able to enjoy the book. At least that's what I do. I don't like what a character did. It never happened. Entire cringe and weird chapter, it was never there. That's how I'm able to enjoy dark romance, to be honest with you. But if you're easily triggered, this is not a book you should take into consideration in any way, shape, or form. Did I like this book? Yeah, I kinda did. I really like the thriller backdrop as well. It added a lot to the story for me. I tend to like gory and controversial situations in books. He has extreme anger issues, and let's just say that he almost feeds her to the sharks while having a spicy encounter. All that so he can teach her a lesson. Also, the FMC Sawyer thinks, "I'll die with your hand wrapped around my throat." Wow, that's it is. The whole book is You know, if the word milking is involved, it kind of takes me out of the story. That being said, this is no masterpiece, but if you like dark romance, you might enjoy reading this. The Spice. Well, it's a 7 out of 5 on the Spice meter. 9 out of 5. Probably, but I would give it only 2 stars for what it is, maybe 2.5, but I am rating this based on it being a weird dark romance book, okay? Lastly, I will tap into my intellectual side and talk about White Knight by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which is a very short story about a lonely, dreamy young man who falls in love with, well, he falls in love with a bitch, to be honest. Basically, it's a story about a depressed man who gets friend-zoned twice. My plan is to read at least one classical book a month, and this month I went for the shortest possible. Is it a masterpiece? Probably not, but it is a very sweet short story, and in 80 pages you can't really expect any intricate plot twist or extremely deep characters. The first part of this book was my favorite, specifically his whereabouts and how lonely he is in the beginning before meeting the girl he falls in love with. I think that the description in this book was outstanding, especially when he talks about how the houses are his friends. I really enjoyed that part. On the other hand, the dialogue was horrendous. Their conversations were just so boring. I believe that saying less can be more in books, and he just kept yapping and yapping about himself so much that I wanted to punch myself in the throat. But reading this, I understand why it is out of place and not very plausible the way they talk to each other and what happens, but I try to refer to it as if I went back in time, not reading it in the 21st century. It's my first Dostoevsky book I ever read, and I can't say that his writing style is the most appealing to me, but I still enjoyed the book. So I will give it a 2.5 star, I think. Lastly, this month I started reading the book of Azrael. I didn't finish it yet and I'm only 36% in. I expected it to be more romance from the beginning. It wasn't. It is mainly political up until this point. We are learning about the world, what's the conflict, who is who, and why someone wants to kill somebody else. So that's mainly what the book is about, 36% in. But I am still enjoying the book. The first few chapters weren't that interesting, but I think with chapter 7 or 8, I started to get interested in the story. I feel like the most important and interesting stuff has yet to be revealed. I'm expecting it to be a good book. Hopefully it is going to be one. It is quite information heavy, so I actually needed a break at some point. But apart from that, I'm getting good vibes from it. If you ever have any recommendations for me, please tell me, because I always have room for 1 or 20 more books in my infinite TBR list. So don't worry, give me all your recommendations. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I am also planning on making this type of videos monthly. Maybe you would enjoy that.